The wind howled across the plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the taste of dust and the promise of another scorching day. Sarah McKenna stood at the edge of her weathered porch, watching the sun sink behind the purple mountains that bordered the horizon. The sky bled crimson and gold, painting the desert landscape in colors that reminded her of things better left forgotten. Coyote Creek was a town that clung to existence like a stubborn weed in the desert, refusing to die, yet never truly flourishing. The main street stretched barely a quarter mile, lined with sun-bleached buildings that leaned against each other for support. Sarah's small cabin sat on the outskirts, separated from the respectable folk by both distance and reputation. 5 years had passed since Thomas died, leaving her with nothing but debts and a tarnished name. But it wasn't his death that had turned the townspeople against her. It was what happened 3 years before that, the night she disappeared into the storm and returned at dawn, her dress torn, her eyes holding secrets that burned like desert fire. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the evening chill crept in. Inside the cabin, she could hear Samuel humming softly as he played with the wooden horse she'd carved for him last Christmas. Her son. Her beautiful boy with his copper skin and eyes the color of dark honey. Eyes that reminded her every day of that forbidden night. The memory came unbidden, as it always did when the wind stirred the sage and the coyotes began their evening song. She'd been gathering herbs near Skeleton Ridge when the sandstorm hit. One moment the sky was clear. The next, a wall of dust and fury swept across the land, turning day into night. She'd tried to find shelter among the rocks, but the storm was relentless, tearing at her clothes, filling her lungs with grit. Then he appeared, emerging from the chaos like he was born from it, tall and lean, with long black hair whipping in the wind and eyes that held the wisdom of ancient things. He'd grabbed her hand without a word, leading her through the blinding storm to a cave hidden in the ridge's face. "You should not be here," he'd said in English, roughened by his Apache tongue. "This land remembers blood." She'd been too grateful for shelter to question his words. As the storm raged outside, they'd sat by a small fire he'd built from supplies cached in the cave. He told her his name was Naichi, that he was scouting for his people who camped further north. She told him about Thomas, drunk again in town, about the failing ranch, about dreams that withered like tumbleweeds. When the storm finally quieted in the deep of night, something had shifted between them. Perhaps it was the intimacy of shared shelter, or the way the firelight danced across his face, revealing a gentleness beneath the warrior's exterior. Perhaps it was simply two lonely souls finding comfort in the darkness. She'd kissed him first, a fact that still surprised her. His response had been hesitant, then fierce, as if he too had been starving for human connection. What followed was a night of passion that defied every boundary their worlds had built between them. In his arms. She wasn't the failing rancher's wife or the white woman who didn't belong. She was simply Sarah, and he was simply Naichi. And for those stolen hours, that was enough. When dawn broke, he'd walked her to the edge of town, staying in the shadows where no one would see. "Forget this night," he'd said, though his eyes begged otherwise. "Your people will not understand." She'd wanted to tell him she didn't care what they thought, but the words died on her lips. They both knew the truth. Their worlds could never merge without bloodshed. "One forbidden night with the Apache warrior," she whispered to the dying light. The words a prayer and a curse. The phrase had haunted her ever since, carved into her heart like initials in bark. Years later, he returned to claim her soul, but he hadn't returned. Not when Thomas died in a drunken brawl. Not when the bank took the ranch. Not when her belly began to swell with Samuel, and the whispers started. The women at church turned their backs. The men looked at her with either disgust or hunger. She'd claimed the father was a traveling merchant who'd passed through town, but no one believed her. They'd seen the child's features, the hint of something other in his beautiful face. "Mama?" Samuel appeared in the doorway, clutching his wooden horse. "Why are you sad?" She forced a smile, kneeling to embrace him. "I'm not sad, my love, just thinking about my papa." The question pierced her heart. What could she tell him? That his father was a warrior from a people the town considered savage? That their one night together had been worth all the scorn that followed? That she'd loved a man she barely knew more deeply than the one she'd married? Yes, she said simply. About your papa. Samuel nodded solemnly, as if he understood more than his 7 years should allow. Will he come for us someday? Sarah pulled him closer, breathing in his little boy scent of dirt and sunshine. I don't know. Sweetheart, I don't know. As if in answer to the child's question, a coyote howled in the distance, a long, mournful sound that echoed across the desert. Sarah shivered, remembering Nietzsche's words about the land remembering blood. These days, with tensions rising between the Apache and the increasing number of settlers, she feared what memories might soon be made. She carried Samuel inside, setting him at the rough table with a bowl of beans and cornbread. As he ate, she lit the oil lamp, pushing back the gathering darkness. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the loose boards of their cabin, after Samuel was asleep in his small bed. Sarah sat by the window, staring out at the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the mountains and mesas, Nietzsche lived his life. Did he think of her? Did he know about Samuel? Or had their night together faded from his memory like footprints in sand? She touched the small leather pouch hidden beneath her bodice, the only tangible reminder of that night. He'd pressed it into her hand as they parted, telling her it would protect her. Inside was a small piece of turquoise and an eagle feather. She'd never shown it to anyone, never dared wear it openly, but it stayed against her heart, a secret talisman. The townspeople could whisper all they wanted. They could call her the Apache's woman, could shun her and her son, but they could never take away what that night had given her. Not just Samuel, but a glimpse of who she could be when stripped of society's expectations. In Nietzsche's arms, she'd been wild and free, as untamed as the land itself. One forbidden night, she repeated, her reflection in the window glass looking back with eyes that held their own secrets. She'd survived 5 years of scorn, 5 years of loneliness, 5 years of raising a child who would never fully belong to either world. She could survive whatever came next, but as she prepared for bed, a strange feeling settled over her, a prickling at the back of her neck, like the air before lightning strikes. Change was coming to Coyote Creek. She could feel it in her bones. The question was whether it would bring salvation or destruction. In the distance, the coyotes sang their ancient songs, and Sarah McKenna lay down to dream of warriors and storms, of forbidden love and promises unspoken, of a night that had changed everything and a future that remained unwritten. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the mountains like an invading army. The first snow fell in late October, transforming the red desert into an alien landscape of white and shadow. Sarah woke to find ice crystals forming on the inside of the cabin windows, her breath visible in the frigid air. Samuel lay curled in his bed like a small animal, buried beneath every blanket they owned. She moved quietly, stoking the dying embers in the fireplace, coaxing them back to life with precious kindling. Wood was scarce this far from the mountains, and what little money she earned from taking in washing barely covered food, let alone fuel. Outside, the wind howled with a fury that made the autumn storms seem gentle by comparison. It cut through the gaps in the walls like invisible knives, finding every weakness in their humble shelter. Sarah wrapped herself in Thomas's old coat, one of the few things the creditors hadn't taken, and peered through the frosted window. The prairie stretched endlessly, a white ocean broken only by the dark shapes of distant mesas. Somewhere in that expanse, wolves hunted. She'd heard them last night, their howls closer than she liked. Hunger made all creatures bold, and winter had only just begun. "Mama, I'm cold." Samuel's voice came small and plaintive from his bed. "I know, my love. Come here by the fire." He patted over in his nightshirt, dragging a blanket that trailed behind him like a cape. She pulled him onto her lap, wrapping them both in the worn fabric. His skin felt like ice. "Can we go to town today?" he asked. "Maybe Mrs. Henderson will have warm milk." Sarah's jaw tightened. Mrs. Henderson, who used to smile so sweetly before Samuel was born, now crossed the street when she saw them coming. "Not today, sweetheart. The storm is too fierce." It was only partly true. Yes, the weather was brutal, but she'd braved worse for necessities. The real storm waited in town, where eyes followed their every move and whispers swirled like snow devils. Just last week, she'd overheard Martha Pemberton at the general store. "That Apache woman," she'd hissed to her companion, not bothering to lower her voice. "Parading that half-breed child around like she's not ashamed. It's indecent." Sarah had kept her head high, purchasing her meager supplies while Samuel clutched her skirt, his eyes too knowing for a boy of 7. On the way home, the Garrett boys had thrown stones, calling out words they'd learned from their fathers. One rock had caught Samuel on the cheek, leaving a dark bruise that still hadn't faded. She kissed the top of her son's head, breathing in his scent. "How about I tell you a story instead?" "About the Eagle Warrior?" Her heart stuttered. She'd been careful never to tell him about his father, but somehow, children knew things. Perhaps blood called to blood across the divide of silence. "Where did you hear about an Eagle Warrior?" Samuel shrugged, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. "I dream about him sometimes. He rides a spotted horse and has feathers in his hair. He's looking for something." The child paused, then added quietly, "I think he's looking for us." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of horses carried through the storm, many horses moving fast despite the treacherous conditions. She moved to the window, Samuel still in her arms, and watched a group of riders materialize from the white haze. Her heart sank. These weren't cowboys or travelers caught in the storm. Their heavy coats and purposeful bearing marked them as something far more dangerous. Miners. The silver strike at Blossom Creek had drawn them like flies to carrion, and each new arrival brought fresh violence to the territory. The riders passed without stopping, but Sarah noticed how one turned in his saddle, marking her cabin's location. They'd be back. Men like that always came back, especially when they spotted a woman alone. As if to confirm her fears, the storm delivered worse news with the afternoon mail rider. Samuel had fallen asleep by the fire, allowing Sarah to slip outside when she heard the horse approaching. Jim Daniels, one of the few men in town who still treated her with basic courtesy, looked grim beneath his snow-covered hat. "Trouble's brewing, Mrs. McKenna," he said without preamble. "That mining outfit that just rode through. They're setting up camp at Willow Springs." Sarah's blood chilled. Willow Springs was sacred to the Apache, one of the few reliable water sources in the high desert. "They can't." "The treaty? Treaties don't mean nothing to men like that," Jim interrupted. "Their leader, Frank Morrison, already declared any Apache they find near their water will be shot on sight." He paused, seeming to wrestle with whether to say more. "There's talk in town. Sarah, folks are scared. They're saying the Apache will retaliate, maybe even raid the settlements." "The Apache haven't raided in years," Sarah said firmly. "They've kept the peace." Jim's expression grew uncomfortable. "Maybe so, but people remember the old days. And they remember—" He trailed off, but she knew what he meant. They remembered her disappearance, her return, her half-Apache son. "Some folks are saying," Jim continued carefully, "that if trouble comes, it might be best if certain people weren't here to remind everyone of connections." The threat was veiled but clear. Sarah gripped the porch rail, knuckles white. "This is our home." "I know." Jim touched his hat brim. "Just thought you should be warned. Keep your boy close. Mrs. McKenna. Town's getting ugly." After he left, Sarah stood in the swirling snow, fear and anger warring in her chest. She'd endured 5 years of cold shoulders and cruel words, telling herself it would get better, that people would forget. But hate was like a prairie fire. It only needed a small spark to explode into something devastating. That night, as the storm raged, she dreamed of Naichi, but this wasn't the tender memory she usually carried. In her dream, he stood on a ridge overlooking a battlefield, his face painted for war. Bodies littered the ground, Apache and white alike, and the snow ran red with blood. Why? She asked him in the dream. His eyes, when they found hers, were infinitely sad. Because your people leave us no choice. She woke gasping, Samuel shaking her shoulder. Mama, you were crying. Sarah pulled him close, her heart still racing. Outside, the wind had died to an eerie stillness. In that quiet, she could hear them, wolves, circling the cabin, drawn by the scent of fear and vulnerability. But as she listened, she realized it wasn't wolves making those sounds. It was something far more dangerous. Horses, moving carefully in the dark, men's voices low and drunk with whiskey and hatred. That's the place. Someone slurred. The Apache woman's cabin. Sarah moved silently, pushing Samuel under the bed. Stay quiet, she breathed. No matter what happens, don't come out. She reached for Thomas's old rifle, checking the chambers. 2 bullets. It would have to be enough. The pounding on the door came moments later. Open up. We know you're in there. Sarah recognized the voice. Dale Morrison. Undoubtedly Frank's brother or cousin. The mining camp bred them like rats, each one meaner than the last. State your business, she called, trying to keep her voice steady. Our business is keeping this town safe from Apache lovers and their spawn, Morrison shouted. Others laughed. 3, maybe 4 men total. Open the door, or we'll break it down. Sarah cocked the rifle, the sound sharp in the cold air. Try it, and I'll put a bullet through the first man who enters. There was muttering outside. Then Morrison spoke again. You can't stay in there forever, and when you come out... He didn't finish the threat. Didn't need to. They lingered for what felt like hours, occasionally testing the door, tapping on windows, making sure she knew they were there. Finally, as dawn approached, they rode off, but not before Morrison called out one last warning. This ain't over. You tell your Apache friends, if they want war, we'll give them war, and collaborators like you will burn first. When she was certain they were gone, Sarah let Samuel emerge. He was trembling but hadn't made a sound. Her brave boy, forced to be stronger than any child should. As the pale sun rose over the frozen prairie, Sarah made a decision. She'd stayed this long hoping things would improve, clinging to the familiar despite its cruelty. But now she understood. There was no future for them here, only escalating violence and hatred. Somewhere beyond these snow-covered plains, Naichi lived and breathed. Perhaps he'd forgotten her. Perhaps he'd moved on. But even the uncertainty of seeking him was better than the certainty of what awaited them in Coyote Creek. That night, as Samuel slept, she pulled out the leather pouch Naichi had given her. The turquoise caught the firelight, seeming to pulse with its own warmth. She closed her eyes, remembering his words, his touch, the promise unspoken between them. One forbidden night with the Apache warrior. She whispered. Years later he returned to claim her soul. Perhaps it was time to stop waiting for him to return. Perhaps it was time to find him herself, before the gathering storm swept them all away. The tension in Coyote Creek grew thick as smoke from a prairie fire. Each day brought fresh news of the miners' encroachment on Apache lands, and each night brought whispered fears of retaliation. Sarah watched it all unfold from the margins, a spectator to a tragedy she could see coming but felt powerless to prevent. The Morrison Mining Company had established their camp at Willow Springs with military efficiency. Within weeks, they'd erected permanent structures, diverted water channels, and posted armed guards around the perimeter. The sacred spring, where generations of Apache had gathered for ceremonies, was now surrounded by barbed wire and signs reading, "Private property. Trespassers will be shot." Sarah learned this from Ben Hutchins, the blacksmith's apprentice who sometimes bought eggs from her meager flock of chickens. He was one of the few who'd still trade with her, though he always came after dark. "They're bringing in more men from back east," Ben told her, shifting nervously in her doorway. "Professional guns, not just miners. Frank Morrison's telling everyone he's going to clear out the savages once and for all." "They're not savages," Sarah said quietly, counting the coins he'd given her. Ben flushed. "I didn't mean... I'm just telling you what they're saying. You should hear the talk in town. Mrs. McKenna. People are scared. They think the Apache will attack any day. Based on what? The Apache have kept their side of the treaty. Based on fear, Ben admitted. And the fact that 3 supply wagons have been hit in the last month, burned to the ground. Drivers killed. Sarah's blood ran cold. The Apache wouldn't. That's what Sheriff Palmer said too. At first, but then someone found this. Ben pulled out a folded piece of paper. A crude drawing of an arrow with Apache markings. These were nailed to trees near the attacks. Sarah studied the drawing, her heart sinking. The markings were wrong, close enough to fool someone unfamiliar with Apache symbols, but clearly fake to anyone who knew better. This isn't Apache work, Ben shrugged, taking the paper back. Try telling that to a mob. Morrison's got half the town convinced we're sitting on a powder keg, and... He hesitated, then continued in a rush. There's talk about you, Mrs. McKenna. Morrison's been asking questions about that night you disappeared. After Ben left, Sarah sat by the dying fire, fear coiling in her stomach like a snake. Someone was deliberately stoking the flames of war, and she had a sick certainty she knew who. The Morrison brothers had too much to gain from an Apache conflict. It would clear the land they wanted and bring military protection for their operations. The next morning brought proof of her suspicions in the worst possible way. Sarah had taken Samuel into town despite the risks, needing supplies they couldn't do without. The general store was nearly empty when they entered. Just Mr. Garrett behind the counter and old Mrs. Dalton examining bolts of cloth. She was reaching for a sack of flour when the commotion started outside. Horses thundering down Main Street, men shouting. Through the window, she saw a crowd gathering near the sheriff's office. "Stay here," she told Samuel, but he grabbed her hand. "No, Mama, I want to stay with you." Together they stepped onto the boardwalk as half the town converged on the scene. In the center of the crowd, Frank Morrison sat tall on his horse, his brother Dale beside him. Between them, bound and bloodied, stumbled 2 Apache men. Sarah's heart stopped. She didn't know their names, but she recognized them as scouts who sometimes traded at the fort. Young men, barely older than boys. "Caught them red-handed," Morrison announced to the crowd. "Scouting the town, marking targets for their war party." Sheriff Palmer pushed through the crowd, his weathered face grim. "Now hold on, Frank, you can't just..." "Can't what?" Morrison's hand moved to his gun. "Can't protect this town from savages. These 2 were carrying these." He held up 2 rifles, Army issue, probably stolen from one of the attacked wagons. "How do you explain that, Sheriff?" the crowd muttered angrily. Someone shouted, "String them up." "We'll have a proper trial," Palmer said firmly, but Sarah could see he was outnumbered, outgunned. "Trial?" Dale Morrison spat tobacco juice into the dust. "We all know what they are. Murderers, Apache raiders. You want to wait until they signal their friends? Until our women and children are... That's enough." Palmer interrupted, but the damage was done. The crowd was turning ugly. Fear and hatred spreading like wildfire. Sarah felt Samuel trembling beside her. She should leave, should get him away from this. But her feet felt rooted to the ground. One of the Apache scouts lifted his head, and, for a moment, his eyes met hers. There was resignation there, the look of a man who knew his fate was sealed. "I say we settle this now," Morrison continued, playing to the crowd. "These savages understand only one thing, strength. We show them what happens to murderers. Maybe they'll think twice before attacking again." "You have no proof they attacked anyone," a voice called out. Sarah was shocked to realize it was her own. The crowd turned, and suddenly she was the center of attention. Morrison's eyes narrowed dangerously. Well, the Apache woman has something to say." His voice dripped contempt. "Maybe you'd like to vouch for them. Tell us all about your connections." Sarah lifted her chin, aware of Samuel pressed against her side. "I'm saying you have no proof. Those rifles could have come from anywhere. These men are scouts, not raiders." "And how would you know that?" Dale Morrison pushed his horse closer, looming over her. "Maybe you've been passing information to them." Maybe that's why you disappeared that night, making plans with your savage lovers. The crowd stirred uneasily. Sarah felt their eyes on her, on Samuel, saw the suspicion taking root. That's a serious accusation, Sheriff Palmer said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Frank Morrison smiled coldly. Look at her boy. Look at his face, and tell me she hasn't been consorting with the enemy. Samuel pressed closer to Sarah, and she felt his small body shaking. Rage flared in her chest. Rage at these men who would terrorize a child, at the townspeople who stood by and let it happen. My son is not your enemy, she said, her voice carrying across the square. He's a child, an innocent child. No half-breed is innocent, someone shouted from the crowd, and Sarah couldn't tell who. The situation was spiraling out of control. The two Apache scouts stood forgotten as the mob's attention fixed on Sarah and Samuel. She saw Martha Pemberton whispering to her husband, saw the Garrett boys picking up stones. Enough! Sheriff Palmer fired his pistol into the air, the sound cracking like thunder. Everyone calm down. Morrison, you'll bring those men to the jail. We'll sort this out proper. And the rest of you, go about your business. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly. Morrison made a show of roughly hauling the two scouts toward the jail, but his eyes never left Sarah. The threat in them was clear. Sarah hurried Samuel away, but not before she heard Dale Morrison say, loudly enough for all to hear, "This ain't over, not by a long shot." That night, the jail burned. Sarah woke to the sound of the fire bell, orange light flickering through her windows. She knew. Even before Ben Hutchins came riding out the next morning with the news, the two Apache scouts were dead. Shot while trying to escape, according to the Morrison brothers, who'd mysteriously been nearby when the fire started. Sheriff Palmer's beside himself. Ben reported. Says he's going to wire for federal marshals, but... He shrugged helplessly. Morrison's got 30 men now, armed men, and more coming. And the town? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Scared. Grateful to Morrison for protecting them. There's talk of forming a militia, clearing out all the Apache camps within 50 miles. Ben paused, then added quietly, You should leave, Mrs. McKenna. Take your boy and go. It's not safe for you here anymore. After Ben left, Sarah sat in the cold morning light, watching Samuel play with his wooden horse. He'd been quiet since yesterday, those old soul eyes holding too much understanding. Mama, he said suddenly, not looking up from his toy. Those men who died, they were like my papa, weren't they? Sarah's throat tightened. Yes, sweetheart. They were Apache. Is that why everyone hates us? Because I'm part Apache. How could she answer that? How could she explain hatred to a 7-year-old? Not everyone hates us, she said finally. But some people are afraid of what they don't understand. Samuel nodded solemnly, then went back to his playing. But Sarah noticed how he made the wooden horse rear and strike, as if fighting invisible enemies. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, a dust storm began building on the horizon. Sarah watched it approach, remembering another storm 8 years ago, remembering strong hands pulling her to safety, dark eyes reflecting firelight. She touched the leather pouch at her throat. Somewhere out there, Nietzsche lived and breathed. Somewhere out there, his people prepared for a war they didn't start but would be forced to finish. And here she sat, caught between two worlds, belonging to neither, while the storm gathered strength and the darkness closed in. As if summoned by her thoughts, a figure appeared on the ridge above town, a lone rider on a spotted horse, silhouetted against the dying light. Sarah's heart leaped, but the rider was too far away to identify. He sat motionless for long moments, surveying the town below, then wheeled his horse and vanished into the approaching storm. Sarah shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. Change was coming with the storm. She could feel it in her bones, in the electricity that charged the air. One forbidden night with the Apache warrior. She whispered to the wind, Years later, he returned to claim her soul. The storm struck just after midnight, and with it came the sound she'd been both dreading and hoping for, the thunder of hooves, the war cries of the Apache, and the screams of a town about to reap what it had sown. The storm raged through the night, but it was not the Apache who came with it. When dawn broke, Coyote Creek stood untouched, the feared attack nothing more than wind and imagination. Yet the damage was done. Panic had seized the town like a fever, and Frank Morrison wasted no time exploiting it. Sarah kept to her cabin for 3 days, venturing out only to tend her chickens and draw water from the well. But on the 4th day, as another dust storm built on the horizon, she saw him. He appeared at the crest of the hill like a vision from her dreams, sitting atop a painted horse that seemed to dance with the wind, even at a distance. She knew him, the way he held himself, the tilt of his head, the controlled power in every movement. Naichi. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he descended the slope, moving neither quickly nor slowly, as if time itself bent to his will. He stopped at the edge of her property, just beyond the broken fence that marked the boundary between her world and his. Sarah stepped onto the porch, her legs trembling. 8 years had passed since that night in the cave. 8 years of memory and longing. And now he was here, real as the dust on the wind. He dismounted with fluid grace, ground-tying his horse with a soft command. As he approached, she saw how the years had marked him, new lines around his eyes, a scar across his left cheek, threads of premature silver in his long black hair. But his eyes remained the same, dark and deep as desert pools. Sarah. Her name on his lips was a prayer and a question. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely breathe. He stopped an arm's length away, and she saw his gaze flicker to the cabin behind her, searching. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. "What they whisper in the wind? That you have a son?" Sarah nodded, finding her voice at last. "Samuel, he's yours." "Naichi." Something shifted in his face. Pain, wonder, regret, all passing like shadows. "I know. I have known for moons beyond counting. His spirit calls to mine across the distance." "Why now?" The question came out sharper than she intended. 8 years? Naichi, why come now?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving to the storm building on the horizon. "Because war comes whether we wish it or not. Because men like those who poison your town will not stop until the earth runs red. Because—" He looked back at her, and she saw raw emotion crack his warrior's composure. "Because I could stay away no longer." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "I waited. God help me. I waited and hoped and—" "I know." He moved closer. Close enough that she could smell sage and leather. Close enough to see the turquoise pendant at his throat, a twin to the one he'd given her. "Every sunrise, every sunset, I thought of you. But I am Apache. You are white. Our worlds are colliding anyway." Sarah interrupted. "The miners, the town, they're going to destroy everything. They killed 2 of your people. Naichi, burned them in the jail." His jaw tightened. Young hawks flying and Stone Dreamer. They were good men, scouts who believed in peace. He paused, then added grimly, "Their deaths will be answered." "No." Sarah grabbed his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. "That's what Morrison wants. He's trying to provoke a war so he can steal your lands. And we should let our dead go unavenged. Let them take what is sacred." His voice held an edge of steel. "You have lived too long among them. Sarah, you forget what honor demands." "I forget nothing," she shot back. "But I know what war will bring. I've seen the federal troops, the guns they have. Your people will be slaughtered. Better to die fighting than live on our knees." They stood facing each other, the old impossible divide between them yawning wide. Then, from the cabin, came a small voice. "Mama?" Samuel stood in the doorway, his wooden horse clutched in one hand. His eyes, so like his father's, went wide as he saw Naichi. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Naichi dropped to one knee, bringing himself to the boy's level. "You are Samuel," he said softly. The boy nodded, stepping closer with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Are you the eagle warrior? The one from my dreams? Naichi's breath caught. He looked up at Sarah, question in his eyes, and she shook her head. She'd never told Samuel, never spoken of eagles or warriors. Perhaps I am, Naichi said finally. What do you dream, small warrior? Samuel moved closer still, studying his father's face with a solemn intensity. I dream of horses and mountains, of a place where the eagles nest, and sometimes, he paused, then whispered, sometimes I dream of you teaching me to ride. Naichi closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. Would you like that, to learn to ride? Yes, Samuel's face lit up. Could you teach me? Mama tries, but she says I need a proper teacher. Samuel, Sarah warned, but Naichi raised a hand. If your mother permits, I would be honored. He stood slowly, his gaze finding Sarah's. But first, we must speak of difficult things. Sarah sent Samuel inside despite his protests, then turned back to Naichi. The momentary warmth of seeing father and son together faded as reality crashed back. You can't stay, she said. If anyone sees you here, I am not afraid of your town. You should be. They're looking for any excuse to attack your people. If they know you're here, if they connect you to me, to Samuel. They already whisper? Do they not? His voice was bitter. Already call you Apache, woman. Already mark your son as different. Sarah couldn't deny it. It will get worse, which is why you must leave. He stepped closer, his voice urgent. Come with me, Sarah, you and Samuel. My people will accept you, protect you. You cannot stay here. The offer she'd dreamed of for 8 years. And now it terrified her. Leave. Just abandon everything? What is there to abandon? This broken cabin, the scorn of those who hate you? His hands found her shoulders, warm and steady. You belong with me. You have always belonged with me. Sarah felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by the same magnetism that had pulled her in that night so long ago. Your people won't accept a white woman. You carry my child. You are already part of us. His thumb brushed her cheek, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. And I am tired of denying what lives in my heart. The shamans say I am cursed, that loving you has weakened me. Perhaps they are right, but I would rather be weak with you than strong alone. Before she could respond, he kissed her. It was nothing like their desperate passion in the cave. This was slower, deeper, carrying the weight of years and sorrow and stubborn hope. Sarah melted into him, feeling the rightness of it even as her mind catalogued all the reasons it was impossible. When they broke apart, she was breathless. Naichi, The sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. Many horses riding hard. Naichi pushed her toward the cabin. Inside, now! But it was too late. Frank Morrison and a dozen riders thundered into view, surrounding the cabin in a cloud of dust. Morrison's eyes lit with vicious satisfaction as he saw Naichi. Well, caught ourselves a savage. He drew his gun, pointing it at Naichi's chest. And consorting with our local Apache lover. This is even better than I hoped. Let him go. Sarah stepped forward, but Dale Morrison swung down from his horse, backhanding her casually. She fell hard, tasting blood. Naichi moved like lightning, but froze as 6 guns swung toward him. Touch her again and I will feed your heart to the ravens, he said quietly. Frank Morrison laughed. Big words for a dead man. Boys, looks like we found ourselves one of them scouts. Probably planning the attack with his woman here. He's done nothing wrong. Sarah struggled to her feet, dizzy from the blow. Nothing wrong. Morrison's voice rose for the benefit of the townspeople who were beginning to arrive, drawn by the commotion. An Apache warrior at your cabin, and you claim innocence. Sheriff Palmer pushed through the crowd, his face grim. What's going on here? Frank? Found this savage at the McKenna place. Pretty cozy they look too. Morrison's smile was ugly. Reckon we know now who's been helping the Apache plan their raids. That's a lie, Sarah protested, but she could see the crowd's mood, see suspicion hardening into certainty. Take him to the jail, Palmer said wearily. We'll sort this out proper. Like you sorted out the last two? Naichi's voice cut like a blade. Your jail has a way of burning. Sheriff! Morrison's gun hand twitched. Resisting arrest. Please, give me a reason. Mama! Samuel burst from the cabin before Sarah could stop him, running to her side. He stared wide-eyed at the guns, the horses, his father surrounded by enemies. Morrison's eyes narrowed as he looked between the boy and Naiche. Well, isn't this touching? A regular family reunion? Leave the boy out of this, Palmer warned. But Morrison was already calculating. Sarah could see it. Take the savage to jail. Morrison ordered his men. The woman and her half-breed brat are coming too, for their own protection, of course. Lots of angry folks in town. Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen. As rough hands seized Naichi, his eyes found Sarah's one last time. In them, she saw apology, love, and a promise. Then they dragged him away, and the sky opened up, the dust storm breaking over them in a howling wall of sand and wind. Through it all, she heard the echo of prophecy. Years later, he returned to claim her soul. But it was Morrison who held them captive now. And Sarah knew with cold certainty that he had no intention of letting any of them leave that jail alive. The jail cell was cold and damp, its stone walls weeping moisture that had frozen into sheets of ice. Sarah huddled in the corner with Samuel pressed against her, trying to share what little warmth they had. Through the barred window, she could see the mining camp's fires burning like demon eyes in the darkness. They'd separated her from Naichi immediately, locking him in the cell reserved for condemned men. She'd heard Morrison's men beating him, the sound of fists on flesh carrying through the thin walls. But Naichi had made no sound. His silence seemed to enrage them more. Mama, I'm scared, Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible. I know, my love, but we must be brave. She stroked his hair, fighting her own terror. Your father is near. We're not alone. 3 days had passed since Morrison's men had dragged them here. 3 days of accusations and threats, of Morrison building his case for war. He'd already sent riders to the other mining camps, spreading word of the Apache spy caught red-handed with the traitor woman. Sheriff Palmer had tried to maintain order at first, insisting on proper procedures, but Sarah had seen his resolve crumbling under pressure. Morrison had too many men, too much influence. The sheriff was one man trying to hold back a tide of hatred. On the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. Sarah woke to the sound of gunfire and screaming. Through the small window, she saw flames rising from the Apache camp near Willow Springs. Morrison's men had struck at dawn, catching families still asleep in their lodges. No, she breathed, pressing her face to the bars. Oh God, no! The massacre was swift and brutal. She saw women running with children in their arms, saw Morrison's men riding them down. The crack of rifles echoed across the desert like thunder, and the smoke rose black against the pale morning sky. Samuel was crying, trying not to look but unable to turn away. Sarah pulled him close, covering his eyes, but she couldn't block out the sounds, the screams, the gunfire, the whooping of men drunk on bloodlust. Enjoying the show, Morrison appeared at their cell door, his clothes splattered with blood that wasn't his. That's what happens to savages who threaten our town. They were families, Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage. Children, elders, they threatened no one. They harbored spies and raiders. Morrison's eyes glittered with satisfaction. But don't worry, your Apache lover is going to pay special attention. We're saving him for last. He left them with that threat hanging in the air. Outside, the killing continued until the sun reached its zenith, then gradually died away to sporadic gunshots and the crackle of burning lodges. As darkness fell, Sarah heard Morrison's men celebrating, passing bottles and boasting of their kills. But beneath the revelry was an undercurrent of unease. They'd expected the Apache warriors to be at the camp, but most had been absent, leaving only the vulnerable behind. Where are the rest of them? She heard one man ask nervously. There should have been more braves. Probably ran like the cowards they are, another replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Near midnight, Sarah was startled by a soft whistle outside her window, a night bird's call, but not quite right. She peered through the bars and saw a shadow move against the wall. Ben Hutchins materialized from the darkness, his face pale with fear. "Mrs. McKenna," he whispered urgently. "I'm getting you out. The whole territory's about to explode. The Apache warriors, they weren't at the camp because they were gathering. Every band within 100 miles is coming for revenge. How?" "No time." Palmer's in his office, drunk and guilty. Morrison's men are mostly passed out. Ben produced a key. "Can't save your man, too many guards, but I can get you and the boy out." Sarah's heart tore. Leave Naichi. But Samuel's life hung in the balance. "Ben, I can't." "You have to. Morrison's planning to hang the warrior at dawn. Make a spectacle of it. He wants to draw out the Apache. Have a proper battle. Your boy doesn't need to see that." The key scraped in the lock, and the door swung open. Sarah grabbed Samuel's hand, but he pulled back. "What about Papa?" he asked, and the word made Sarah's eyes burn. "We'll come back for him." She lied, hating herself. "But we need to go now." They slipped through the shadows, Ben leading them past snoring guards and empty bottles. The town was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. At the edge of Main Street, Ben had hidden 2 horses. "Ride north," he told her, boosting Samuel into the saddle. "Fort Stockton's 3 days hard riding. The army might—" A shot rang out, and Ben crumpled. Sarah spun to see Dale Morrison stepping from an alley, gun smoking. "Going somewhere?" He trained the weapon on her. "Can't have you missing the show tomorrow. Frank's got special plans." Sarah moved instinctively, putting herself between the gun and Samuel. "Let my son go. He's just a child. Half-breed brat is what he is." Dale spat. "But don't worry. We'll take care of him after we're done with you and his savage father." The gun rose, aimed at her heart. Sarah closed her eyes, pulling Samuel close, waiting for the shot. It never came. Instead, Dale Morrison made a strange gurgling sound. Sarah's eyes flew open to see an arrow protruding from his throat. He dropped to his knees, then fell forward into the dust. From the shadows emerged a figure she recognized, one of Naichi's band, a young warrior called Whitehorse. Behind him, more shapes materialized like ghosts. "Come," Whitehorse said urgently. "The war chief waits. Naichi, he's in the jail. They're going to—" "We know. Come now, or all is lost." Sarah hesitated for one agonizing moment, then lifted Samuel onto the horse and swung up behind him. As they rode out into the desert night, she looked back to see flames beginning to rise from the mining camp. The Apache had come for their vengeance, and Morrison had his war at last. They rode hard through the freezing darkness, following paths invisible to Sarah's eyes. The war party moved like smoke, silent despite their numbers. As they climbed into the foothills, Sarah saw the full scope of what was coming, hundreds of warriors, painted for battle, their faces grim with purpose. At a sheltered canyon, they stopped. Whitehorse helped them dismount, then led them to where an old man waited by a small fire. Sarah recognized him as Juanito, one of the Apache leaders who'd long advocated for peace. "You are the woman of Naichi," he said in accented English. It wasn't a question. "Yes." The old man studied Samuel with eyes that seemed to see through flesh to spirit. "And this is his son. I see his father's strength, his mother's heart." He looked back at Sarah. "Naichi spoke of you many times, said you were worth breaking the world for. Is he? Will you save him?" Juanito's expression was grave. "We will try, but Morrison has made a trap. Using Naichi as bait, many will die before the sun sets again." He paused, then added softly, "He knew this might happen. He came to you anyway, knowing the cost." Sarah felt tears freeze on her cheeks. "I never wanted this, any of this. Want and fate are different rivers," the old man said. "They sometimes flow together, sometimes apart, but always they reach the sea." As dawn approached, painting the mountains blood red, the war party prepared to move. Sarah watched them apply paint, check weapons. make peace with whatever gods they carried. These men who'd been called savages showed more honor in their preparations for death than Morrison's mob had shown in their slaughter of innocents. Whitehorse approached, offering her a knife. "For protection," he said simply. Sarah took it, the weight strange in her hand. She'd left Coyote Creek as a victim. If she returned, it would be as something else entirely. "Stay here with the boy," Juanito instructed. "Whatever happens, do not come to the town until the fighting is done." But Sarah shook her head. "That's not who I am anymore. I won't hide while others fight for my family." The old man studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps Naichi was right. Perhaps you are Apache in spirit, if not in blood." He turned to Whitehorse. "Give her a horse. She rides with us." As the sun crested the mountains, casting long shadows across the desert, Sarah McKenna rode toward war. Behind her, Samuel was safe with the Apache women. Ahead, Coyote Creek waited, along with the man she loved and the reckoning that had been 8 years in the making. The words echoed in her mind like a drumbeat. One forbidden night with the Apache warrior. Years later, he returned to claim her soul. But it was she who would do the claiming now, with steel in her hand and fire in her heart, riding with warriors toward a destiny written in blood and love and the endless desert wind. The Apache war party moved through the pre-dawn darkness like a force of nature, silent despite their numbers. Sarah rode among them, her heart pounding with each hoofbeat. Whitehorse had given her warrior's clothing, leather leggings and a tunic that allowed her to ride freely. Her hair was bound back, her face marked with ash. She was transformed. No longer the scorned woman of Coyote Creek, but something fiercer, more elemental. As they neared the town, Juanito raised his hand, bringing the column to a halt. Below them, Coyote Creek sprawled in the valley, morning smoke rising from chimneys. In the center of Main Street, they'd erected a gallows. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "We divide here," Juanito said quietly. "Whitehorse leads the first group to the mining camp. Thundermaker takes the second to cut off escape routes. I will lead the assault on the town." He looked at Sarah. "You ride with me. When we break through to the jail, you get Naichi. We will hold them off." Sarah nodded, gripping the rifle Whitehorse had given her. She'd never killed, never thought herself capable of it. But looking at that gallows, thinking of Samuel fatherless, she knew she would do whatever necessary. "They expect us," Whitehorse observed. "See, men on the rooftops, barriers in the streets. Morrison wants his war," Juanito said grimly. "He will have it." As the sun broke the horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold, the attack began. The first wave hit the mining camp, where Morrison's men scrambled from their beds to meet death in their long underwear. The sound of gunfire echoed across the valley, followed by the smoke of burning buildings. In town, church bells rang frantically. Men rushed to defensive positions while women and children fled to the church. Sarah saw Morrison emerge from the jail, shouting orders. Positioning his men. "Now!" Juanito commanded. They swept down from the hills like an avalanche. Horses stretched in full gallop, war cries splitting the air. Sarah rode in the center of the charge, fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. This was madness, but it was a madness born of love and desperation. The first volley from the town's defenders dropped several warriors, but the charge didn't falter. They crashed into the barricades, horses leaping, guns blazing. Sarah found herself in the thick of it, bodies pressing on all sides, the air thick with powder smoke and screams. A miner rose up beside her, aiming his rifle. Without thinking, she struck him down with her gun butt, feeling the shock of impact up her arm. He fell, and she rode on, focused only on reaching the jail. Through the chaos, she saw Sheriff Palmer stumble from his office, still drunk, trying to make sense of the battle raging around him. Morrison shot him without hesitation, eliminating the last pretense of legal authority. "The jail!" Juanito shouted, pointing with his rifle. Sarah spurred her horse, but Morrison's men had formed a defensive line. Bullets whined past her head, and she saw warriors falling on either side. They were paying in blood for every foot of ground. Then she saw him. Naichi stood on the gallows platform, hands bound, a noose around his neck. His shirt was gone, revealing the marks of torture on his bronze skin. But he stood proud, unconquered, his eyes searching the battle until they found hers. Time seemed to slow. Across the distance, through the smoke and carnage, their gazes locked. In that moment, Sarah understood the fullness of their tragedy. Two people who'd found each other across an impossible divide, only to be torn apart by the hatred of their peoples. Morrison stood beside the gallows, his hand on the lever. "Come any closer and he drops," he bellowed. The Apache warriors hesitated, unwilling to risk Naichi's life. But Sarah didn't stop. She drove her horse straight at the gallows, lying low over its neck as bullets filled the air around her. "Sarah, no!" she heard Naichi shout, but she was already airborne. Having launched herself from the saddle, she crashed into Morrison, both of them tumbling from the platform. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dust, fighting for control of his gun. Morrison was stronger, but Sarah fought with desperate fury. She bit, clawed, struck with knees and elbows. The gun went off, the bullet whining past her ear. Then strong hands pulled Morrison away. Whitehorse had broken through the lines. Sarah scrambled to her feet and ran to the gallows. With shaking hands, she cut the noose from Naichi's neck, then his bonds. He caught her as she swayed, his arms encircling her. "Foolish woman," he murmured against her hair. "Beautiful, brave, foolish woman." Around them, the battle raged on. The Apache had taken heavy losses, but Morrison's forces were scattered, demoralized by the loss of their leader. Sarah saw townspeople beginning to emerge, some joining the fight, others simply watching in shock as their ordered world collapsed. Martha Pemberton stood in her doorway, her face white as she surveyed the carnage. Her eyes met Sarah's across the battlefield, and in them Sarah saw not hatred but a dawning understanding of what their fear and prejudice had wrought. "We need to go," Naichi said urgently. "More soldiers will come. This is only the beginning." But Sarah couldn't leave. Not yet. She thought of Samuel, waiting in the Apache camp, of the life they might have together. But she also thought of Ben Hutchins, who died trying to help her, of Sheriff Palmer, flawed but trying to do right. Not everyone in Coyote Creek had been evil. Some had simply been afraid, or weak, or blinded by Morrison's manipulation. "The women and children in the church," she said. "We can't leave them defenseless." Naichi looked at her with something like wonder. "After all they did to you?" "Hatred breeds hatred," Sarah replied. "Someone has to break the cycle." Juanito approached, his rifle smoking. "The mining camp burns. Morrison is captured. What are your orders, War Chief?" Naichi straightened, assuming the mantle of leadership. "Send runners to the church. Tell them any who wish to leave safely may do so. We want no more innocent blood." He looked at Morrison, who knelt in the dust, Whitehorse's knife at his throat. "This one comes with us. He will answer to Apache justice for the massacre." "No," Morrison snarled. "You can't. I'm a white man. The army will find you started a war for gold and greed," Sarah interrupted coldly. "They'll find the evidence of your false flag attacks, the murdered scouts, the slaughtered families. You wanted to play savage? Now you'll face savage justice." As the sun climbed higher, the battle wound down. The surviving miners fled or surrendered. Townspeople emerged to count their dead and tend their wounded. The Apache gathered their fallen warriors, keening songs of grief rising in the morning air. Sarah stood with Naichi on the hill overlooking the town, watching smoke rise from the ruins of the mining camp. So much death, so much waste, all for one man's greed and a town's blind hatred. "What now?" she asked quietly. Naichi pulled her close. "Now we run. The army will come, as they always do when white men die. We'll take our people deep into the mountains, to the secret places where they cannot follow. And us, Samuel and I," he turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "That night in the cave, you gave me your trust, your body, your heart. Now I ask for your life." Come with me, Sarah. Be my wife in truth. Help me raise our son as both Apache and white, bridging two worlds." Sarah looked back at Coyote Creek one last time. She thought of her cabin, her chickens, the small life she'd built from the ashes of her marriage. It seemed so insignificant now, so small compared to what Nietzsche offered: love, family, belonging. "I was never meant for that life," she said finally. "Even before you, I was dying there, piece by piece. And now," she smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years, "now I choose to live." They returned to the Apache camp as the sun reached its zenith. Samuel ran to meet them, throwing himself into his parents' arms with cries of joy. Around them, the people prepared to move, to disappear into the vast wilderness where they could still be free. As they packed their few belongings, Sarah found the leather pouch Nietzsche had given her so long ago. She held it up to the light, watching the turquoise gleam. "You kept it," Nietzsche said softly. "Every day. It was my reminder that for one night, I was truly alive." He took the pouch from her hands, adding a matching stone from his own medicine bag. "Now you need no reminder. Now you have forever." As the Apache band moved out, heading for the distant mountains, Sarah rode beside Nietzsche with Samuel seated before her. Behind them, Coyote Creek smoldered in the valley, a monument to the price of hatred. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, a life unlike anything she'd known. But she was not afraid. She'd found her place at last, not in the narrow confines of town prejudice or the lonely isolation of her cabin, but here in the vast spaces between worlds, where love transcended blood and belonging was earned through courage. The words that had haunted her for so long took on new meaning as they rode toward their future. One forbidden night with the Apache warrior. Years later, he returned to claim her soul. But she understood now that he hadn't claimed her soul. He'd helped her find it. The mountain passes were treacherous with early winter snow, but the Apache knew every trail, every hidden valley where they might find shelter. For 3 days they climbed higher, leaving the desert behind for pine forests and granite peaks. Sarah rode close to Nietzsche, Samuel wrapped in furs between them, as they fled the retaliation that was surely coming. On the 4th night, as they camped in a sheltered canyon, the scouts brought word that changed everything. The U.S. Army had arrived at Coyote Creek, not the local militia Morrison had expected to manipulate, but a full cavalry regiment led by Colonel James Whitman, a man known for both his fairness and his ruthless efficiency. "He has Morrison," the scout reported. "The miners who survived are talking, telling how Morrison started the war. The colonel is angry. He hangs those who disturb his peace." But this news brought little comfort. Juanito gathered the leaders around the fire, his weathered face grave in the flickering light. "Whitman may punish Morrison, but he will still come for us. We shed white blood. That cannot go unanswered. We defended ourselves." Whitehorse protested. "They massacred our families first. When has that ever mattered?" An older warrior asked bitterly. Sarah listened to the debate with growing dread. She'd thought the worst was over, that they'd escaped to freedom. But she was learning that freedom was more complicated than simply riding into the mountains. That night, as snow began to fall, she found Nietzsche standing watch on a high ledge. The moonlight turned the falling snow to silver, and in the distance, they could see the glow of fires, many fires, spread across the valley below. "The army," Nietzsche said quietly. "They follow our trail." Sarah moved close to him, seeking his warmth. "How long before they find us?" 2 days, perhaps 3. The snow helps hide our passage, but Whitman has Apache scouts of his own, reservation Apache who trade freedom for army pay." The bitterness in his voice was sharp. "What will you do?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she could feel the weight of leadership pressing on him. He was war chief now, responsible for hundreds of lives, warriors, women, children, elders. Every decision could mean life or death. "Some say we should scatter, make our way to Mexico. Others want to fight, to make the mountains run red with the soldier blood." He turned to her, and she saw the anguish in his eyes. "What would you have me do, Sarah? You who know both worlds?" Sarah thought of Colonel Whitman, of the power of the United States Army, of the endless cycle of violence that seemed to trap them all. Then she thought of Samuel, asleep in their shelter, dreaming innocent dreams. Is there no other way? No path to peace? Peace? Nietzsche laughed, but there was no humor in it. They want us on reservations, penned like cattle, forbidden our language, our ceremonies, our way of life. Is that peace? Before Sarah could answer, commotion erupted in the camp below. They hurried down to find warriors dragging a lone figure into the firelight, a white man, but not a soldier. Sarah recognized him with shock, Judge Theodore Hartwell from Coyote Creek, a man who'd always treated her with cold courtesy despite the town's prejudice. "Please," the judge gasped, exhausted from his climb. "I must speak with your leaders. I bring an offer from Colonel Whitman." The Apache warriors looked ready to kill him on the spot. But Nietzsche raised his hand. "Let him speak." Judge Hartwell straightened his snow-covered coat, trying to maintain some dignity. His eyes found Sarah, widening in surprise. But he addressed Nietzsche. "Colonel Whitman sends me because he knows the truth of what happened. Morrison confessed before he was hanged, told of the false attacks, the provocations, the massacre of innocents. And," Juanito prompted harshly, "the colonel regrets the actions of the miners. He offers terms, return the stolen weapons and horses, release any captives, and he will allow your band safe passage to the San Carlos reservation. No trials, no hangings. The reservation," Whitehorse spat, "a slower death than bullets." But the judge wasn't finished. "There's more. Mrs. McKenna, Sarah, the colonel specifically asks for you. He says if you return with me, testify to what you witnessed, it could change things. The Eastern papers are watching this conflict. Your testimony about Morrison's crimes, about the Apache's legitimate grievances, could influence policy." Sarah felt every eye upon her. Return to the white world? Testify in courts that had never shown justice to the Apache? "It's a trap," one warrior said. "They want to separate us, weaken us." "Perhaps," Judge Hartwell admitted. "But consider the alternative. Whitman has 500 men and more coming. How many of your people will die if you fight? How many children will never see another spring?" Nietzsche looked at Sarah, a question in his eyes. She knew what he was asking. Not what she wanted, but what was right for their people. "If I go," Sarah said slowly, "what guarantee do we have that my testimony will matter?" The judge reached into his coat, producing a letter. "From Colonel Whitman himself. He gives his word as an officer that you'll be heard, that your words will reach Washington. He also—" Hartwell hesitated, then continued. "He offers to establish a new reservation, closer to your traditional lands, with water rights guaranteed, if you help broker a real peace." The council erupted in arguments. Some called it lies, others saw hope. Through it all, Nietzsche stood silent, his face unreadable. Finally, Juanito raised his hand for silence. "We will consider this through the night. Judge, you will stay as our guest. Tomorrow we give our answer." As the camp settled uneasily for the night, Sarah and Nietzsche retreated to their shelter where Samuel slept peacefully. They sat watching their son, each lost in thought. "I have to go," Sarah finally said. "If there's even a chance it could help." "I know." Nietzsche's voice was heavy. "I saw it in your eyes when the judge spoke. You carry hope like others carry weapons. Come with me, both of you. Show them that we're a family, that Apache and White can—" "No." His refusal was gentle but firm. "My place is with my people. And Samuel." He touched his son's sleeping face. "He's safer here for now. Your world isn't ready for a boy like him." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "We just found each other again." Nietzsche drew her into his arms. "And we will not lose each other. This I swear. Go, speak your truth. Help our people if you can. But know that you will always have a place here, that I will wait for you as I waited before." They loved each other then with desperate tenderness, aware it might be their last night together for a long time. Every touch was a promise, Every kiss a vow that distance couldn't break what they'd built. When dawn came, the decision was made. Sarah would return with Judge Hartwell, carrying the hopes of the Apache for a just peace. The band would withdraw deeper into Mexico while waiting to see if her testimony bore fruit. The parting was agony. Samuel clung to her, not understanding why she had to leave. "You said we'd be together," he cried. "You promised." Sarah knelt in the snow, holding him tight. "And we will be. This isn't goodbye. My brave boy, I'm going to try to make a better world for you. One where you don't have to choose between your father's people and mine." Naichi lifted Samuel into his arms, and the boy buried his face in his father's shoulder, over their son's head. Naichi's eyes met Sarah's. "Ride well, my heart. May the spirits guide you to wisdom and safety." "One forbidden night with the Apache warrior," Sarah whispered, the old words taking on new meaning. Years later, he returned to claim her soul. Naichi finished, and found it already belonged to him. Sarah mounted the horse Judge Hartwell had brought, her Apache clothing exchanged for a proper lady's riding habit that felt like chains after her brief taste of freedom. As they rode down the mountain, she looked back once to see Naichi and Samuel watching from a ridge, two silhouettes against the morning sky. Then the trail turned, and they were gone, and Sarah rode toward an uncertain future, carrying the weight of two people's hopes on her shoulders. Behind her lay love and belonging. Ahead lay duty and the slim chance of justice. The battle at Coyote Creek had ended, but Sarah knew the real war, the one for understanding, for acceptance, for a world where her son could be both Apache and white without shame, had only just begun. The courtroom in Fort Grant was packed to overflowing, journalists from Eastern newspapers crowding the benches alongside military officials and territorial representatives. Sarah sat in the witness chair, her back straight despite the weight of every stare upon her. 6 months had passed since she'd left the mountains. 6 months of depositions and hearings, of telling her truth again and again to men who listened with varying degrees of skepticism or sympathy. Colonel Whitman had kept his word. Her testimony had traveled all the way to Washington, sparking debates about Indian policy that raged in Congress and newspapers alike. But today was the day that mattered most. Today, the Territorial Commission would decide whether to honor the new treaty that had been painstakingly negotiated. "Mrs. McKenna," the prosecutor began, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of legal proceedings. "You claim that Frank Morrison deliberately provoked conflict with the Apache to seize their lands. Can you provide specific evidence?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I was present when Morrison's men burned the jail with 2 Apache scouts inside. I heard him admit to staging the wagon attacks to blame on the Apache, and I witnessed the massacre at Willow Springs, where women and children were murdered while the warriors were away." A murmur ran through the crowd. The prosecutor continued, "Yet you yourself took up arms with the Apache. You participated in the attack on Coyote Creek to save the man I love and the father of my child." Sarah replied without shame, "To prevent a judicial murder that would have sparked even greater bloodshed." "The man you love," the prosecutor repeated, his tone heavy with implication. "The Apache warrior, Naichi, with whom you had relations, while still married to your late husband." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice level. "My husband was a drunkard who left me alone for days at a time. The night I met Naichi, I was lost in a sandstorm, facing death. He saved my life, showed me kindness when my own people had shown me none. Yes, I loved him. I love him still. And our son is the best of both worlds. He has his father's courage and strength, his mother's hope for a future where such love isn't forbidden." Judge Hartwell, who'd become her unexpected ally through the long legal process, stood from the observers section. "If I may address the commission, Mrs. McKenna's personal choices aside, her testimony has been corroborated by numerous sources. Morrison's surviving men have confessed to the false flag operations. The Army's own investigation confirms the Apache were responding to unlawful aggression. The lead commissioner, a stern man named Garrison, shuffled through papers, Be that as it may, the fact remains that white citizens died in the conflict. The public demands accountability. Then hold accountable those who truly caused the deaths, Sarah said, her voice rising with passion. The Morrisons of this world who see indigenous people as obstacles to profit. The townspeople who let hatred blind them to humanity. Not the Apache who fought to protect their families and sacred lands. The proceedings continued for hours, but Sarah had said what she came to say. As she stepped down from the witness chair, she caught sight of a familiar figure in the back of the room. Whitehorse, dressed in white man's clothes, but unmistakably Apache in his bearing. Their eyes met, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. That evening, in her small room at the boarding house, Sarah was startled by a knock. She opened the door to find Whitehorse standing in the hallway. "How?" she began. "The war chief sends word," he said quietly, producing a small bundle. Inside was a piece of paper covered in painstaking English letters. Nietzsche had been learning to write. The message was simple. "We wait. The boy grows strong. My heart travels with you." There was also a small drawing. Clearly Samuel's work. 3 figures holding hands beneath a sun that was half yellow, half red. "Are they safe?" Sarah asked urgently. Whitehorse nodded. "They camp in the Blue Mountains. The boy learns to track deer and read the stars. He asks for his mother every night." Sarah pressed the drawing to her heart. Tell them I'm trying, that I'll come back as soon as I can." 2 days later, the commission delivered its verdict. The new treaty was approved. Not everything the Apache had hoped for, but more than they'd had. A reservation in their ancestral lands, with water rights protected by federal law, funds for a school where Apache children could learn English while keeping their own language, and most remarkably, amnesty for all participants in what was now officially termed the Coyote Creek Defense. As Sarah stood on the courthouse steps, reading the decision to the gathered crowd and journalists, she saw the mix of reactions, relief from some, anger from others who still demanded Apache blood. Change would come slowly. She knew. Hatred didn't die with a single legal decision, but it was a beginning. That night, Colonel Whitman himself came to see her. "You've done a remarkable thing, Mrs. McKenna. Your testimony changed minds that I thought were set in stone." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we implement the treaty. The Apache can begin returning from Mexico. There will be challenges, disputes, setbacks, but we've created a framework for peace." He paused, studying her. "I assume you'll be returning to your family?" Sarah met his knowing gaze. "As soon as I can, Colonel." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I believe you're right. The future belongs to people like your son, who can bridge both worlds. Perhaps one day, the love you share with Nietzsche won't be forbidden but celebrated as proof that we're all human beneath the surface differences." 3 weeks later, Sarah rode once again into the mountains, this time with a small military escort that would turn back at the new reservation boundary. Her heart pounded as familiar landmarks appeared. The red rocks where she'd first learned to gather piñon nuts. The stream where Samuel had caught his first fish. Then she saw them. Nietzsche stood at the edge of the Apache camp, Samuel beside him. The boy broke free and ran toward her, his young legs covering the ground with surprising speed. Mama, you came back!" Sarah leaped from her horse and caught him in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "I promised, didn't I? I'll always come back to you." Nietzsche approached more slowly, his dark eyes drinking in the sight of her. When he reached them, he enclosed both mother and son in his embrace, and Sarah felt the broken pieces of her world finally coming together. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, the Apache held a ceremony. Not a war dance or a mourning ritual, but a celebration of new beginnings. The shaman blessed the union of Sarah and Nietzsche, recognizing formally what had always been true in their hearts. As Sarah stood beside Nietzsche, Samuel between them, she watched their people, for they were her people now, dance in the firelight. Apache and white. She had been told these worlds could never meet, but here she was, living proof that love could cross any boundary, that courage could overcome any prejudice. "Do you regret it?" Naichi asked quietly as they watched the dancers. The life you left behind. Sarah thought of Coyote Creek, of the small, frightened existence she'd lived there. Then she looked at her husband, for that's what he was now in every way that mattered, and her son, and the community that had accepted her despite everything. I regret nothing, she said firmly. That life was never truly mine. This, you, Samuel, our people, this is where I belong. Naichi pulled her close, and she felt his smile against her hair. Then the prophecy is fulfilled at last. Prophecy? The shaman spoke it the night I first returned from meeting you. One forbidden night with the Apache warrior. Years later he returned to claim her soul. But in the claiming, both shall be freed. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across the camp like music. Then we're free. Free as the eagle, beloved. Free as the wind over the mountains. As the stars emerged in the vast desert sky, Sarah McKenna, now Sarah of the Apache, stood with her family on the threshold of a new world. The old boundaries were breaking down, the old hatred slowly dying. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more battles to fight with words instead of weapons. But tonight, there was peace. Tonight, there was love. And in Samuel's bright eyes, she saw the future. A world where no love was forbidden, where no child had to choose between the heritage of their parents. The fire crackled, sending sparks up toward the stars. And Sarah whispered the words one last time, no longer a lament, but a celebration. One forbidden night with the Apache warrior. Years later he returned to claim her soul. And, in the claiming, they had both found their freedom at last. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long journey? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback and stories mean the world to us. Let's connect and share our love for these frontier tales together.